He was a struggling single dad, fixing broken things for a living, until a billionaire woman walked into his world with one outrageous request: marry me, just for the weekend. What began as an agreement turned into something neither of them could have predicted. Something real. Before we begin, if stories of quiet courage, unexpected love, and second chances speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Moments Story. One click helps us keep sharing stories that matter with people who truly care. Now settle in. This one might just stay with you long after the last word. Jude Callahan had learned to live with the sound of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. It was the kind of noise that most people tuned out, but not him. After 6 years of working the graveyard shift as a security guard in downtown Chicago, he could hear when a bulb was about to die. When the hum turned into a rattle, like a throat clearing in the dark, he stood behind the front desk of the Westmont Plaza, shoulders squared in his old uniform, the name tag a little crooked from Maisie's enthusiastic hugs that morning. She'd said it was lucky he hadn't had the heart to straighten it. The lobby was nearly empty. Just past 1 a.m., the building turned into a mausoleum of glass and concrete. He liked it that way. Quiet meant safe. No one caused trouble at this hour, and the city outside felt like it belonged to the ghosts. Jude glanced at the CCTV monitors out of habit. A janitor mopped the second-floor hallway. In the service elevator, a woman in a long wool coat stood with one hand pressed to the wall, the other gripping a small clutch. Her head was bowed slightly, hair cascading in dark waves. Then the elevator shuddered. The screen blinked. He tapped it. Nothing on instinct. Jude grabbed his keycard, radioed the front desk backup, and moved. In less than a minute, he reached the service elevator, where the woman was now frozen. The door stuck halfway open. A grinding sound came from inside the shaft, metal protesting. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he called, approaching carefully. She didn't answer at first. Her eyes were wide but not panicked. Calm, in fact, too calm, in a way that meant she'd been trained for control. But her hands betrayed her. They were shaking. "I'm going to help you out," he said gently. "Just need you to trust me." A beat. Then she nodded once. He wedged his shoulder into the gap, pressed hard until the doors gave an inch more. Not enough. Without thinking, he kicked off his boots, jammed them into the bottom of the door, and used both hands to widen the opening to step out cautiously. Her boots landed soundlessly on the floor, and then the power flickered back. They stood in the strange stillness that follows adrenaline. Jude took a breath and stepped back. "You okay?" She dusted off her coat, chin lifted. "Yes, thank you." He nodded already, turning to check the control panel, but her voice stopped him. That was quick thinking. It's part of the job. "No," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly as if studying him. Most would have called maintenance and waited. "You didn't." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. He offered a polite nod and backed away. "Wait," she said. "What's your name?" "Jude. Jude. Callahan." She seemed to consider that for a moment as if memorizing it. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." And then she was gone, heels clicking across the marble like nothing had happened. 3 days later, Jude got a call on his off day. He was washing dishes, while Maisie sang off-key in the background, playing with an old doll in a cardboard box spaceship. The phone buzzed, and the caller ID read, "Westmont Executive." He hesitated, then picked up Mr. Callahan. A smooth male voice said, "Ms. Westmont requests a meeting. In person. Private." He didn't know what shocked him more, that the woman from the elevator was the Lyra Westmont, or that she even remembered his name. The meeting was scheduled at the penthouse suite. Jude had no idea what he expected. Maybe a thank you, a job review. Not this. "I need a husband," she said, plainly seated across from him in a sun-drenched room of glass and modern art. He blinked. "I'm sorry." A fake one, she clarified. Just for a weekend. My brother's wedding is next Saturday, and the press is watching me. Investors are curious about my personal life. They want stability. A partner. Appearances. You want me to pretend to be your husband. She smiled slightly. I want you to be my husband for 3 days. All expenses covered. You'll stay at the estate, attend the ceremony, play the role. Then you go home. He stared at her, incredulous. Why me? Because you don't belong in my world, she said simply, which means you won't try to stay. And you're good with children. I saw that in your file. Jude folded his arms. Maisie, she'll be well taken care of. You'll be together the whole time. He didn't know whether to be offended or flattered. What's in it for me? He asked finally. Lyra folded her hands. $30,000 and a contract that ensures your complete privacy and legal protection. $30,000. He thought about the rent overdue, the truck needing repairs, Maisie's dental bill, her school field trip. He thought about the way Lyra had looked in the elevator, cold and composed on the outside, but trembling underneath. She wasn't offering him love. She was offering him a transaction, and somehow that made it easier to say yes. He extended his hand. 3 days. She shook it, her grip firm. 3 days. But neither of them knew that those 3 days would change both of their lives forever. Lyra Westmont never second-guessed herself. It was a skill. No, a defense mechanism honed through years of boardrooms, hostile takeovers and dinners, where she had to pretend to enjoy caviar while being evaluated like a portfolio. But as she stepped into the guest house of her own estate and saw Jude Callahan crouched by the fireplace, showing his daughter how to toast a marshmallow using only the embers, a small doubt crept in. She hated doubts. The estate was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from being too carefully designed. Everything from the imported stone floors to the hand-stitched curtains screamed control. Lyra had insisted on it. She controlled environments like other people controlled volume. It was the only way she could breathe. And yet, this man, this rugged stranger with a worn duffel bag and a denim jacket frayed at the sleeves, seemed to unravel all of that just by existing in her space. Maisie giggled a warm, unfiltered sound. She had one marshmallow on a stick, the other already in her mouth. Jude's eyes crinkled as he watched her, and something in Lyra's chest shifted. Hope, it's all right, we started a fire, Jude said, standing up as he noticed her in the doorway. It was chilly in here. It's your home for the weekend, she replied, a little too formal, a little too late. Do whatever makes you comfortable. Maisie ran over sticky fingers and all. You're the lady from the elevator. Lyra blinked. Yes, I am. You were super brave, Daddy said. You didn't even scream. Lyra crouched awkwardly to the child's level. Well, your dad made sure I didn't have to. Maisie tilted her head, assessing her, the way only children could with no filter, no diplomacy. You're pretty, but you look kinda tired. Jude nearly choked on his laughter. Maisie, it's all right, Lyra said, and to her surprise, she meant it. She's right. For a moment there was a silence, filled only by the gentle crackle of the fire. Then Jude spoke. I brought some games, old-school ones, Uno checkers, and a puzzle. If we get snowed in, Lyra nodded, though she couldn't imagine herself sitting on the floor playing board games. That had never been her childhood. But Maisie clapped her hands with delight. Puzzle night. Can we miss Lyra? Please, Lyra hesitated. You don't have to call me miss. Okay, Maisie chirped. Then just Lyra, like a princess name. She blinked again. No one had ever said. Her name sounded pretty powerful. Yes, intimidating, absolutely. But pretty. Only a child would think so. Later that evening, Lyra returned to the main house, the warmth of the guest house still clinging to her skin like the scent of smoke and sugar. She sat by the window in her study, staring at the contract on her desk. 3 days appear at the rehearsal dinner, attend the ceremony, smile for the photos. No touching unless initiated. Maintain character. No press interviews. It was her script, her lines. So why did it already feel off script? The next day they attended a brunch hosted by her brother Julian and his fiancée Camilla, who greeted Jude with a smile that bordered on flirtation. "So this is the mystery man," Camilla said, looping her arm through Jude's as if they were old friends. "Lyra, you've been hiding him too well." Lyra didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened. "We prefer our privacy." Jude, oblivious or pretending to be, only smiled. "Nice to meet you. You must be the real star of next weekend." "Oh, stop!" Camilla giggled. "But I do expect you two to dance at the reception." "Lyra, don't you dare pull another disappearing act." The comment stung more than Lyra expected. "I won't," she said. "Not this time." That night, Jude sat on the porch of the guest house while Maisie slept. Her little body curled under a quilt brought from home. Lyra approached quietly, unsure why she had come. Perhaps she just wanted the quiet hum of his presence. "You okay?" he asked without turning. She sat down beside him. "I'm not used to children. You don't have to be." "Maisie makes it easy. Not for everyone." He looked at her. Then, "You're doing fine." She almost said, "Thank you." Almost. But then her walls kicked in. "This whole thing," she said, gesturing vaguely to the estate, to the stars above. "It's ridiculous, isn't it?" "Depends. What part do you think is ridiculous? That a woman like me has to fake a relationship to satisfy people who have no right to judge her?" Jude leaned back, hands laced behind his head. "You're not faking everything." She turned. "Excuse me, you didn't fake that moment in the elevator, or when you looked at Maisie and smiled, like she reminded you of something you lost?" The words hit too close, too deep. "I'm paying you to be my husband, not my therapist. I'm just a guy on a porch, Lyra." Saying what I see, they sat in silence for a long while after that. And when Lyra finally stood to go, her voice was softer. "Good night, Jude." "Good night." Lyra, and for the first time in years, her name didn't sound like a title. It sounded like a person. Jude Callahan had lived in many houses. Some had squeaky floors and cracked windows. Others smelled of dust, old regret, or too much bleach. But none had ever felt quite like this one, immaculate, palatial, and oddly lonely. The guest house on Lyra Westmont's estate had everything heated. Floors, linen sheets, even a smart fridge that softly glowed when opened. But it was the little things, details no money could fake, that caught Jude off guard, like how the towels were folded with surgical precision, yet none looked like they'd ever been used, or how the bookshelf displayed first editions but had no dog-eared pages. The place wasn't lived in, it was staged, decorated for admiration, not comfort. Yet somehow, by the second morning, the smell of cinnamon toast drifted through the kitchen, and the sofa bore the slight indentation of where Maisie liked to curl up and read. Her laughter had echoed through the cold spaces, and Jude had started to wonder if maybe they were bringing warmth into a house that had forgotten how to hold it. Lyra appeared in the doorway, holding a steaming mug of coffee still in her robe. It was the first time Jude had seen her without armor. No designer suit, no sleek heels, no practiced smile. "Just her. I hope we're not disrupting your routine too much," Jude said, offering a half grin. Lyra took a sip, then shrugged. "It's different, but not unpleasant." That almost sounded like a compliment. I'm out of practice. Maisie skipped into the room, clutching a half-finished crayon drawing. Daddy, look, I drew the wedding. Jude lifted her up onto his knee. Let's see, is that me in the funny suit? That's you in a tuxedo. And that's Lyra in a big dress. And that's me throwing flowers. Lyra leaned in. That's very detailed. Maisie beamed. I like pretending. Lyra's smile faded a little. So do I. That afternoon, Lyra gave Jude and Maisie a private tour of the main house. Not because she had to, but because something about the way Maisie had looked at the foyer, like it was the entrance to a castle, had made her want to see it through fresh eyes. This is the piano room, Lyra said, pushing open tall white doors. My mother used to host recitals here. I never learned to play. Why not, Maisie asked, running her fingers along the keys. I wasn't very good, and my tutor gave up. You just needed a nicer teacher. Jude chuckled. Maisie's the optimistic type, I noticed. They moved on to the gallery wall portraits of stoic-looking ancestors with sharp cheekbones and eyes like glass. Ever feel like they're watching you? Jude asked, half teasing. Lyra nodded. Always. Maisie tugged at Jude's sleeve. Can we take a picture and put us on this wall too? Lyra opened her mouth, ready to explain the formality, the tradition, the legacy, but then she looked at the child's hopeful eyes and said instead, yes, we can. That evening the doorbell rang. Lyra opened it to find Victor Harrow, her longtime assistant, holding a garment bag and a clipboard. Your tailor dropped off Jude's tux for the rehearsal dinner, he said smoothly. And here's the updated press list. Minimal reporters as requested. Thank you, Victor. He paused, eyes flicking toward the fireplace behind her, where Jude and Maisie sat on the floor, fitting puzzle pieces together, like they'd done it every night for years. You've made quite the transformation, Victor murmured. Lyra narrowed her eyes. Meaning? You're softer. Less efficient. That's not criticism, by the way. She shut the door before answering. Late that night, Jude stood alone in the kitchen, rinsing mugs and wiping crumbs from the counter. He worked by habit, tidying as he went, folding dish towels, aligning things. It calmed him. Lyra stepped in barefoot. You don't have to clean up. That's what staff is for. He shrugged. Feels weird, leaving a mess when I've got hands to fix it. You fix things a lot, don't you? Guess. So she looked at him, then truly looked at the way he moved, purposeful, quiet, unassuming, how his presence didn't demand space, but somehow filled it anyway. My father used to say, men like you were meant to serve. She said the words, slipping out before she could edit them. Jude didn't flinch. He dried his hands on a towel, turned to her calmly. And what do you say? She hesitated. I think men like you remind people like me what service actually means. The air between them shifted, subtle, electric, not romantic, yet just honest. Then Maisie called from down the hall, and the moment passed. As Jude settled Maisie into bed, she asked, Do you think Lyra likes us? He tucked the blanket under her chin. I think she's learning to. Maisie yawned. She's like our house. Looks fancy but needs hugs. Jude chuckled. You might be on to something, kiddo. When he turned off the light, he glanced down the hallway toward the main house, and though he didn't know why yet, he whispered to himself, She's not pretending anymore. The next morning, Jude found himself alone in the study of the guest house, his fingers trailing across the spines of books arranged in perfect order. He wasn't looking for anything to read. He was looking for something real. A bookmark, a scribbled margin note, a dog ear. But there was none, just untouched leather and silence. The house was beautiful, but it was also hollow. He spotted a small wooden box tucked beneath the bottom shelf out of sight. He knelt, pulled it free. Inside were photos, black and white, faded at the edges, some creased. A younger Lyra, maybe 12 or 13, standing stiffly beside a grand piano. A woman who must have been her mother, regal but remote. A man, likely her father, looking at the camera with the same guarded expression Jude had seen on Lyra's face. He wasn't sure why, but he closed the box gently, as if it were sacred. Some things didn't need to be explained out loud to be understood. Later that afternoon, while Maisie napped with a picture book across her chest, Jude stepped outside into the garden, where Lyra sat alone beneath a pergola. She was watching the wind move through the hedges, her coffee untouched beside her. "You look like someone who needs to lose a chess game," Jude said, holding up a wooden board and a mischievous grin. Lyra glanced at him. "I haven't played in years. Then I have a fighting chance." She smirked, and they began. A few quiet turns in, she asked without looking up. "You went through the books?" He blinked. "I did. And they look good. But they haven't been read. That's the point. Why Lyra moved a pawn, because when you open something you risk creasing it." Jude made his move, and maybe find something worth the crease. She paused at that, then looked up. "Is that how you live? Everything worth the wear?" "I live in a 2-bedroom trailer. Wear is kind of the currency." She laughed. It was small, surprised, unrehearsed. "You're a strange man, Jude Callahan. I'll take that as a compliment." That evening, they were invited to Julian and Camilla's rehearsal, tasting a luxurious over-the-top dinner held in a hall filled with chandeliers and polished marble floors. Lyra wore a deep emerald dress that shimmered under the lights like a secret Jude, in his custom-tailored tux, looked like he'd stepped out of a vintage photo. He hated the spotlight, but for Lyra, he played the role. He held her hand, whispered comments that made her laugh, real laughter this time, and smiled even when people stared too long. During dessert, Lyra leaned over and whispered, "You're good at this. You're easy to look at," he replied, then blinked, surprised. He'd said it aloud. Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. That's the first time a compliment didn't feel like a transaction. After the dinner, Jude carried a sleeping Maisie back to the guest house. He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, then stepped onto the porch where Lyra was already waiting. She was barefoot again, a blanket draped around her shoulders. "I saw you today," she said softly. "You were charming, confident. You don't belong in my world, but you wore it like it fit." He leaned on the railing. "I did it for Maisie, so she'd think we belonged. And for me," he hesitated, "I didn't want you to feel alone." The words hung between them. Lyra turned away. "I grew up in a house where silence was currency, where feelings were liabilities. My father once told me, love is what weak people use as an excuse to lose focus. And your mother?" She agreed. Quietly, Jude's voice was steady. "That's not love. That's fear in a tuxedo." Lyra looked at him sharply. "My wife used to say," he continued, "that love is what survives when everything else fails. It's the thing you fall back on, not from." Lyra blinked, her throat tight. "I didn't know you were married. Cancer took her 5 years ago." She sat down slowly. "I'm sorry." She was the strong one, he said. "I was just the guy who built the porch swing." They sat in silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Then, without looking at him, Lyra said, "Do you think it's too late for people like me?" Jude turned to her. "Too late for what? To believe in something soft." He didn't answer right away. Just reached out, gently, brushed a fallen leaf from her hair. "No," he said, "but it helps to have someone believe in you first." In the guest house, Maisie stirred in her sleep. In the main house, the fire burned low, and in the air between two people who weren't supposed to mean anything to each other. Something unspoken had begun to bloom. Not love yet, but something with roots. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be just another obligation, a polished evening for polished people. But as Jude adjusted the stiff collar of his tuxedo and glanced at Maisie twirling in her flower girl dress, he felt something deeper take root in his chest. It wasn't nerves. It was unfamiliar terrain, as if he were about to cross into a world that had never invited him in and might never let him leave. Lyra descended the grand staircase like a secret revealed. Draped in silver satin, her gown shimmered with every movement. Her hair, usually tied back with surgical precision, now flowed in gentle waves over her shoulders. She didn't smile, not quite, but her eyes met Jude's with a steadiness that made him forget to breathe. Maisie gasped. "Daddy, she looks like a fairy." Jude cleared his throat. "Yeah, kiddo, she really does." Lyra approached her gaze, flicking between father and daughter. "You both clean up." "Well, so do you," Jude said, unable to mask the awe in his voice. She blushed, not visibly, but he could see it in the way her posture softened and how she looked away, just a beat too long. The venue was a lakeside estate owned by Camilla's family, with string lights draped across ancient oaks and long banquet tables nestled under the twilight sky. Servers glided by with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. Musicians played something soft and expensive-sounding. But Jude wasn't thinking about violins. He was thinking about Lyra's hand, resting gently on his arm as they walked in together. A subtle, deliberate contact, but it lingered. "Remember," she whispered, "everyone here thinks we're madly in love." He leaned closer, letting his breath warm her ear. "That might be easier than we thought." Her smile was real this time, small, honest. They mingled. Jude made polite conversation with Julian, who turned out to be kinder than expected, though suspicious of Jude's sudden appearance in Lyra's life. Camilla, on the other hand, adored Maisie, and kept drawing Lyra into cheerful stories about childhood summers. Stories Lyra barely remembered but pretended to, out of courtesy. As the night wore on, the air grew cooler, and a soft breeze stirred the lake. Candlelight flickered across silverware. A toast was proposed. "To new beginnings," Camilla's father said. Raising his glass, "To family." Julian added. Jude noticed Lyra tense beside him. He instinctively slid his hand into hers under the table. Not for show this time, not for the cameras, just to remind her she wasn't alone. She looked at him startled, then let her fingers wrap around his. It was quiet, but certain. Later, during the rehearsal, waltz, couples paired off. Jude hesitated. He hadn't danced in years, but Lyra held out her hand. "Mr. Callahan," she said lightly. "Care to prove to these billionaires that grit can waltz?" He took her hand, laughing. "Only if you promise not to judge my two left feet." They moved onto the dance floor. At first it was awkward, her elegance brushing against his sturdy awkwardness. But soon a rhythm emerged, like water finding its path through stone. "You're not bad," she said. "I'm a fast learner." They spun slowly beneath the lights. Her body fit against his like a memory. He didn't know he had. Jude studied her face. "Do you miss it?" "Miss what?" "This life. The people. The expectations." She hesitated. "Sometimes I think I miss the version of myself I pretended to be. That's honest and dangerous. Why? Because when you start being honest, you realize how much pretending hurts." They slowed. Their steps grew smaller, closer. "You're not pretending tonight," Jude said. "Neither are you." Back at the guest house after putting Maisie to bed, Jude found Lyra standing on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. "Despite the warmth, I used to dream," she said. Voice quiet, that one day I'd marry someone who made me laugh when I didn't want to. Jude stepped closer, and I stopped dreaming. It was easier. He touched her elbow gently. Dreams don't die. They just wait for us to be ready again. She turned, eyes bright in the moonlight. Why do you say things like that? Because they're true, and because no one said them to me for a long time. There was a beat of silence. Then, without planning it, she reached for his hand, just held it. No kisses, no lines, no performance. Just a billionaire with too many walls, and a single dad who never learned to build any, together under the stars, not rehearsing real. The morning of the wedding broke with a gentle breeze, and skies so blue they looked painted. Jude stood on the balcony of the guest house, sipping coffee from a chipped mug he'd brought from home, his small rebellion against the luxury that surrounded him. Down below, staff moved like clockwork, arranging chairs by the lake, stringing white flowers along the arch, testing microphones, brushing invisible specks from silver trays. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. Behind him, Maisie ran barefoot in her white dress, arms flapping like wings. "Daddy?" "Look, I'm a butterfly, you sure are, Jude," smiled, catching her mid-flight and spinning her once before setting her down. "You nervous nope. I get to throw petals and eat cake. That's not scary." He chuckled, but a knot formed in his stomach. He wasn't scared either. Not of people. Not of pretending. He'd been pretending for years. What scared him was how little of it felt like pretending anymore. Lyra stood before the mirror in her dressing suite, unmoving as Clara, her longtime friend and therapist in all but name, fastened a clasp at the back of her gown. "You look beautiful," Clara said softly. "Beautiful doesn't matter today. Then what does believability?" Clara paused. "Is that really all this?" As Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she adjusted a bracelet on her wrist, an old piece from her mother's collection. It clashed with the dress, but it was the only thing that felt real. "You know," Clara said, stepping back, "there's a point in every performance where the act starts to feel like truth. Be careful." "Lyra, don't lose yourself in the wrong script." Lyra met her gaze in the mirror. "Maybe I already have." Guests began to arrive. CEOs, senators, board members, socialites. Jude stood at the edge of the path, letting Lyra take the spotlight as photographers buzzed like bees around them. She slipped her arm into his and leaned close. "Remember you love me." "I'm trying real hard," he muttered with a wink. She smiled, not the practiced one, the one that started in her eyes and refused to hide. The ceremony was short, elegant, and thick with the scent of rose petals and approval. Lyra's brother gave a charming speech, Camilla cried on cue, and Maisie nearly stole the show by dropping the petal basket and dancing instead of walking. But it was when Lyra and Jude stood beneath the flowered arch, hand in hand, facing each other, that the world seemed to still. The officiant asked them to exchange personal words, something unscripted. Lyra's throat tightened. She hadn't planned for this. Jude stepped forward. "First, I'm not from your world," he said, voice low but strong. "I don't know much about stocks or strategy, but I know what it feels like to lose someone you love, and I know what it means to have a second chance, even when you least expect it. So today, I stand here, not as someone pretending, but as someone grateful. Grateful for this moment, for her." He looked at Lyra, eyes unwavering. Then it was her turn. She could have laughed it off, could have charmed her way through with something rehearsed, but instead, she looked at him and whispered, "You remind me of who I was, before the world taught me how to hide. You make me want to stop hiding." Silence, but not the awkward kind, the sacred kind. And then, as if compelled by something deeper than performance, Jude leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't for show. It wasn't staged. It was slow, deep, real. The guests erupted in applause, but neither of them noticed. For a moment, it was just them. Hours later, after the champagne had been poured and the first dance completed, Jude found himself standing by the lake alone. The moon was high, reflecting on the still water, like a secret. Lyra joined him, heels in her hand, hair now undone. "I didn't plan any of that," she said. "Neither did I. I kissed you. I kissed you back." A pause. "What happens now?" she asked. He turned toward her, brushing a loose strand from her face. "I don't know," he said, "but for once I'm okay not having a plan." She stared at him, at this man who had walked into her curated life with a duffel bag and a soft voice, and turned everything upside down with nothing but kindness. "I think I am too." They stood there side by side, no longer playing parts. Not fake husband and wife, just a woman and a man, worn and bruised by life, still standing. Still open, still hoping. She reached for his hand again, not because the cameras were watching, but because she wanted to feel something real, and she did. And beneath a sky full of stars, the wedding that wasn't supposed to be real became the one they'd never forget. The day after the wedding, the skies changed. It started with a whisper, clouds drifting in from the north, soft and gray, casting long shadows across the estate. By afternoon, the air grew heavy with that particular tension. Jude recognized from his years in the Midwest the kind that made birds fly lower and trees still their leaves. A storm was coming. Lyra stood in the sunroom, watching the horizon darken. "We should leave soon," Victor said behind her, glancing at his phone. "The plane's ready. The press is waiting in Manhattan." Lyra didn't turn. "What about Jude and Maisie? They have a rental car. They'll head back tomorrow." She remained quiet, her gaze fixed on a single leaf clinging to the glass. "Tell the pilot I'm not going." Victor blinked. "Excuse me, I'm staying another night." But I said what I said. It wasn't a request. It was the voice she used in boardrooms and quarterly earnings calls, but this time it carried something softer beneath it. A tremor. A truth. That evening, the storm broke. Rain came in sheets, hammering the roof of the guest house. The power flickered. Once then, Jude built a fire in the hearth, just in case. While Maisie sat cross-legged nearby, making shadow puppets on the wall, Lyra arrived at their door, soaked through from the walk between buildings. Jude opened it in surprise. "You came here in this? I needed to," she said simply. He stepped aside without question, handing her a towel. "You could have called." "I didn't want to call." Maisie ran to hug her, giggling. "You look like a wet puppy," Lyra laughed, breathless, shaking water from her sleeves. "I feel like one." They made soup. Not a planned meal, just things Jude found in the pantry. Cans of beans, some herbs, pasta. Lyra sliced vegetables with surprising ease, while Maisie stirred like a pro, proudly declaring herself head chef. For the first time in years, Lyra found herself laughing in a kitchen, not meant for show, but for warmth. Dinner was eaten cross-legged on the rug. Stories were told. Jude shared one about a squirrel that got stuck in his truck's engine once. Maisie tried to retell it, but added dragons. Lyra, hesitant at first, spoke of a summer when she snuck out to go horseback, riding against her mother's wishes. "You," Jude teased, "a rebel. I had it in me. Once you still do." Their eyes met, not a stare, just an understanding. When Maisie finally fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in a patchwork quilt, the storm still raged outside. Thunder rolled low and long, like distant drums. The fireplace crackled. Jude handed Lyra a mug of tea. Their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. "I used to love storms," she said. "They made me feel small, in a way that was comforting, like I didn't have to hold everything together." Jude sat beside her. "You don't." She looked at him. Tears barely held back. You say that like it's easy. It's not. But it's worth trying. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room. For a moment, Jude saw her not as the billionaire, not as the woman who orchestrated a fake wedding, but as someone deeply human. Fragile, brave. I'm scared, Jude. Of what? Of needing this. Of wanting more. He placed his hand over hers. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you real. They sat together in silence as the wind battered the windows. Then Lyra spoke, barely audible. I've spent my whole life building walls to keep people out. And suddenly, I want to invite you in. Jude didn't respond with words. He simply reached out and wrapped her hand fully in his warm steady. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in her adult life, she allowed herself to rest. Really rest, without guarding a single inch of herself. Later that night, as the winds howled louder, a tree branch crashed near the side of the house. Maisie stirred, frightened, and called out. Jude reached her first, lifting her gently and whispering reassurances. Lyra joined them moments later, kneeling beside the bed. Is it going to fall down? Maisie asked, eyes wide. No, sweet pea, Jude said. It's just wind and noise. We're safe. Lyra took the girl's hand, and we're together. That makes us strong. Maisie nestled between them and fell back asleep within minutes. The three of them stayed like that, curled together, as the storm raged on a trio shaped not by blood, but by choice. And in the flickering shadows, Lyra realized something terrifyingly beautiful. She wasn't pretending anymore. This was real, and she didn't want it to end. The storm passed sometime after midnight, leaving behind a quiet so pure it felt borrowed. Raindrops still clung to the windows like reluctant memories, and the fire in the hearth had long since gone out. But inside the guest house, warmth lingered thicker than the blankets, softer than the light. Lyra stirred awake first. She was still on the floor, Maisie curled against her side, one small hand gripping a corner of her robe like a lifeline. Jude sat nearby, leaning against the couch, chin resting on his chest, fast asleep. His hand, though, was still touching hers barely, but enough she looked at them both for a long while, unmoving. This wasn't her world, but it felt more like home than anything she'd known. Carefully, she got up, tucking Maisie under a quilt. She walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the sink, unsure why her chest felt tight. She had stood in penthouses, on yachts, on investor stages, but tonight, she stood barefoot in a borrowed house, wearing a robe that smelled faintly of wood smoke and baby shampoo, and it undid her. "You all right?" came Jude's voice, low and hoarse with sleep. She didn't turn. I don't know. He walked to her barefoot as well and stood beside her at the sink. "Talk to me." Lyra stared at the sink. "I used to think I'd spend my whole life alone. Not in a sad way. Just efficient, controlled. I thought solitude was power. It can be, but it's also exhausting." She looked at him now. "You make it look easy. Caring, trusting, belonging." Jude smiled faintly. "I don't know about easy, but I stopped believing that broken things had to stay broken." She nodded, eyes wet. "I don't know how to stop performing, Jude." "Then don't stop. Just start performing for the right audience." "And who is that?" He didn't answer, just took her hand and placed it over his heart. It was steady, slow sure. They sat on the porch steps watching the fog rise off the grass. The air was cool and still smelled of wet leaves. It would be morning soon, but for now, the world belonged to them, alone. "I never asked," Lyra said softly. "How did she die? Your wife?" Jude exhaled, not with pain, but memory. "Leukemia. Quick, unfair." "I'm sorry. She was the kindest person I ever knew. Quiet, strong, she used to say, 'Love is like sunlight. You can't trap it. But you can grow something with it. Lyra leaned her head against his shoulder. And did you? He paused. I tried. And then for a while I stopped trying, until a woman in an elevator reminded me how to hope again. She smiled. I was terrified that night, I know. And you didn't laugh. I never would. Inside the clock ticked softly. Rainwater slid down the gutters, slow and steady. Lyra shifted slightly on the step, and Jude noticed how she relaxed into him, like she wasn't used to leaning on anyone. Can I ask you something? She whispered. Anything. If this had been real from the beginning, if it hadn't been an arrangement, would you have said, yes? He looked at her steady. I would have said, yes, faster. Lyra let out a soft breath, half laugh, half disbelief. I don't know how to do this. You don't have to. Just don't run. I've always run. Jude, from pain, from trust, from anything that might pull me off script. He turned slightly toward her. Then let this be the night you stop. She said nothing at first. And then, quietly, she reached for his face. Her hand lingered on his cheek, tracing the line of his jaw like it might anchor her. Her touch wasn't romantic. It was reverent, as if she were learning something sacred by heart. I want to try, she said. Not a confession, a decision. Jude nodded once. So do I. The sun crept up behind the hills, brushing the lawn in soft gold. Maisie woke and found herself alone in bed. She tiptoed to the porch and saw them still together, watching the sky. Are we going home today? She asked sleepily. Rubbing her eyes, Jude looked at Lyra. Lyra looked back. We'll figure it out, she said, gently. Opening her arm for the girl, Maisie snuggled in between them. Can we stay here forever? Jude smiled. Maybe not forever. Bug. But long enough to make a few more memories. Lyra kissed the top of Maisie's head, then whispered something to Jude. Only he could hear. I've never felt this safe. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just took her hand again. And this time, she didn't let go. The world didn't knock. It barged in. It came in the form of emails, voicemails, flashing headlines, and Victor's relentless knocking on the front door of the main estate. Lyra stood in the hallway, still barefoot. Hair damp from her shower robe clutched tightly around her. The serenity of the storm, the softness of Jude's voice, the quiet miracle of a breakfast with no rules, they all vanished in a single breath. 2 missed board meetings, Victor said crisply. Bloomberg is running a piece about your absence, and Westman's quarterly numbers have been leaked. Lyra blinked. By whom? Likely Carrington. You know he's been circling your seat since the merger. Her fingers dug into the silk at her waist. How bad is it? Not fatal. But if you don't return today, it will be. She said nothing. Victor studied her. This retreat, whatever it is, it was always temporary. You knew that. She looked past him through the open French doors out to the garden, where Jude and Maisie were stringing leaves into necklaces. The man she had asked to pretend was now the only real thing she knew, and she would have to leave him. Jude knew the moment he saw her face. She was dressed again in the version of herself the world demanded. Pressed blouse, sharp lines, no softness, armor. But her eyes gave her away. They flickered when they met his almost apologetic. I have to go back, she said quietly. He nodded. I figured Maisie ran up, leaves tangled in her curls. Are we going to the lake again? Later, Lyra knelt, smoothing the child's hair. Not today, sweetheart. I have to go. Maisie's smile faded. Why? Because there are people who need me. Maisie said nothing. She looked over at Jude, confused. He placed a hand on her shoulder. It's okay, Bug. Grown-ups have to work sometimes. Will she come back? Lyra opened her mouth, then closed it again. I don't know, she said, honestly. Maisie wrapped her arms around her waist. I hope so. They loaded her bags into Victor's black sedan. No fanfare, no goodbye speeches, just the three of them standing in a driveway where something had started now, unraveling in silence. Lyra turned to Jude. I meant everything I said. So did I. I'm not good at long distance. Or waiting. Or promises I can't keep. I'm not asking for any of that. Then what are you asking for? He stepped closer. That you don't pretend this didn't matter. She looked at him for a long time, then nodded. It mattered. She leaned forward, kissed his cheek. Not for show, not for performance, just because her heart needed a place to land. Then she climbed into the car. Maisie waved until the car turned the corner and disappeared. Days passed. The guest house felt emptier than Jude remembered. Not quiet empty. He went back to work, fixed a radiator, helped Maisie with spelling, told himself he hadn't expected anything more. But at night, he still looked at the couch where Lyra had sat, still found her robe draped over the back of a chair, still made 2 mugs of tea out of habit. One went cold. Maisie asked about her. Sometimes Jude didn't lie. She's doing important things, baby, but weren't we important too? He had no answer for that. Lyra returned to the city. The boardroom greeted her with steel eyes and harder questions. She answered all of them with poise. Even when Carrington smugly asked about her disappearance, she smiled and corrected him with, it was strategic clarity. Her numbers were solid, her power intact, but she didn't feel whole. She lay awake at night in a penthouse with views to die for and wondered why she missed a chipped mug and a girl who drew castles in chalk. She scrolled past Jude's name in her phone more times than she could count. Once she typed a message, I wish I were there, then deleted it. The city had her again, but her heart was still elsewhere. Then one night, she opened her closet to find that same old bracelet, the one that clashed with everything. The one she wore at the wedding. She slid it on. It didn't match her dress, but it matched her truth. She picked up her phone, heart pounding, and finally pressed call. Jude answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, but his breath caught when he heard hers. I wasn't sure you'd call. He said, I wasn't sure I'd be brave enough. Silence. Then she said it, I miss you. Jude closed his eyes. Then come home. I don't know if I belong there. You do. I'm scared. So am I. But maybe that means we're ready. And across 2 cities, 2 lives, and 1 story that had started with a fake kiss, a real beginning quietly unfolded. Not with vows, not with rings, just with truth and a promise that next time when the world came back, they'd face it together. Jude didn't expect the knock. It was late afternoon, the kind where sunlight slanted gold through the blinds, and Maisie was napping with her favorite book on her chest. He'd been in the garage fixing a drawer that refused to slide, humming an old tune he barely remembered the words. To the knock came again, tentative, not urgent. He opened the door with a wrench still in his hand, expecting a neighbor, maybe a delivery. Instead, there she was, Lyra. No chauffeur, no suitcase, no dramatic entrance, just Lyra in a sweater, 2 sizes too big. Jeans with a frayed hem, and that same bracelet from the wedding on her wrist. Hi, she said. Voice barely above a whisper. He didn't move at first. Couldn't I? I wasn't sure if I should come to the front door. Or he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms before she could finish. She didn't cry, but her shoulders sank like someone who'd been holding her breath for far too long. They didn't speak much at first, not because there wasn't anything to say, but because the silence was finally a place they both fit into. Later, after Maisie awoke and squealed with joy and climbed into Lyra's lap like she had never left. Jude made tea. Lyra sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around the mug like it anchored her. I told them. I needed time, she said softly. They didn't like it. Will you go back? He asked. I don't know. But I know I won't go back the same. He nodded. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small folded paper. I found this. Thought you might want it. Jude opened it. It was the note he had left in his old toolbox before the wedding, a note he never meant for anyone to find. You don't have to change to be worthy of love. You just have to stop hiding from it. He stared at the words, then at her. You kept it. Lyra nodded. It felt like something I wasn't allowed to forget. That night, they built a fire and sat together, while Maisie drew planets on the back of junk mail. Lyra leaned against Jude's side, her voice thoughtful. All my life, I was told that strength meant not needing anyone, that love was a liability, but I've never felt weaker than when I tried to do everything alone. And now, she looked up at him. Now, I think real strength is letting someone carry part of the weight. He didn't kiss her. He didn't have to, because she was already his in every way that mattered. The next morning, Jude found her in the garage. She was sitting on the old workbench, flipping through a manual with oil smudges on her fingers. Need help? He asked, amused. I was trying to figure out what you see in this place. And she held up a rusted bolt. It's stubborn, but not impossible. He chuckled like someone I know. She smiled, then grew quiet. This life, it's slower, smaller. But I think it might be exactly what I need. Jude stepped closer. You don't have to give up who you are to be here. And you don't have to shrink to fit into my world either. Their eyes met. For the first time, it wasn't about compromise. It was about creating something entirely new. Later that afternoon, they worked together in the kitchen. Maisie set the table with unmatched napkins and a centerpiece made from dandelions. The radio played old country songs, neither of them remembered, but hummed along to anyway. As they sat down to eat, Jude reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded note again. He passed it across the table. You reminded me of this, he said. Lyra opened it, smoothing the creases. Maisie looked between them. What is it? It's the reason she came back, Jude said. Lyra met his gaze, eyes warm. And the reason I'll stay. After dinner, Jude stepped out briefly to clean his tools, and Lyra lingered at the table. Maisie resting her head on her lap. Mama used to say, dandelions were wishes, the girl murmured. They are. Lyra whispered. They float until they find a place to grow. Did you make a wish? Lyra looked down at her eyes glistening. I did, and I think it found me. No grand declarations, no orchestras, just one note, one decision, and a room full of light. They built themselves where every sound was real, every moment chosen, and every love earned. The first snow came early that year, not the heavy kind, but the soft whisper of winter. Thin flakes drifting through the golden autumn light, like an afterthought. Jude stood on the porch in his flannel shirt, watching the sky turn silver. He held a mug in his hands, steam curling past his face. Inside the house, laughter echoed from the kitchen. He didn't move, he just listened. It had been 3 weeks since Lyra returned, 3 weeks since the woman who built walls, higher than most people's dreams, had walked through his front door with nothing but a paper note and a trembling heart. She stayed, and because she had to, not because the world paused. She stayed because for the first time, she wanted to belong somewhere that didn't require her to conquer it. Inside, Lyra was helping Maisie make cookies. The counters were dusted in flour, the sink full of dishes, and the girl's hands sticky with dough. Lyra wasn't in control here, and she was beginning to love it. Do cookies always look like this? She asked, staring at a tray of lopsided shapes. Maisie giggled. Only the best ones. Lyra smiled, wiping her hands on a towel, and glanced out the window at Jude. He was sanding an old bench, the one she had once called junk, and now called his favorite place to sit with her after dinner. Something inside her cracked softly, beautifully. She stepped outside. "You ever gonna finish that thing?" she teased. Arms crossed, Jude looked up and grinned. "If I finish it, you'll stop coming out here to bug me." She walked over and sat on the steps beside him. "Maybe I like bugging you?" They watched the snow fall in silence. "I talked to Victor this morning." She said Jude didn't look surprised, and he said Carrington took the vote. The board approved him. "You okay?" She thought about it, then nodded, surprisingly. "Yes, I don't miss being the loudest voice in the room. I miss knowing who I was, and now." She looked at him. "Now I'm figuring that out all over again. And I think that's a good thing." That night, after Maisie fell asleep with a cookie still in her hand, Lyra found Jude in the garage tinkering with a lantern. "You're always fixing things," she said, leaning against the doorframe. He didn't turn around. "That's what I do. And what if it's not broken?" He finally looked at her. "Then I protect it." She stepped closer, the air between them charged with something quiet and steady. "I want to build something with you," she said. "Not a company, not a plan, a life." Jude's hands dropped from the lantern. "I want the ordinary things," she continued. "Burnt toast, shared socks, grocery lists, a porch light left on for someone I've had the world. I want this." He pulled her in without a word, and for the first time she let herself be held, without checking her reflection or her schedule. She just breathed. Spring came slow. They planted herbs behind the guest house. Jude built a swing for Maisie, and Lyra learned how to fix a fence post. They went to farmers' markets, missed birthdays, got caught in the rain, and once argued about how to fold fitted sheets. It was messy. It was real, and every day it deepened. One evening, Maisie handed Lyra a drawing, 3 stick figures, a sun and a little house with a chimney that looked like a question mark. "Is this us?" Lyra asked Maisie. Nodded. "It's our house." "The chimney's where wishes go." Lyra looked down at the girl's hopeful face and whispered, "Then this is the only home I ever needed." A few months later, they drove into town to register Maisie for school. The clerk handed Lyra a form and asked, "Relationship to child." Lyra hesitated. Then, with a soft smile, she wrote one word: family. Years later, no one would remember the boardroom battles, the headlines, or the merger that broke her legacy. But in a small town where the snow always came early, people would talk about the woman who once ruled Wall Street and chose to raise a little girl who wasn't hers, and love a man who never asked for anything but the truth. She didn't lose her power. She redefined it, not in dollars, but in dinners made together, in names whispered before sleep, in being the woman who came back and stayed. If this story touched you in any way, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? It warms our hearts to see how far these simple stories can travel, and your presence truly means more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this about love, kindness, and second chances, feel free to subscribe to Soul Moments Story. There's always room here for one more kind soul. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. We know you could be anywhere, and we're honored you chose to be here.